yeah, today we're talking about, because we never really had a good introduction to why we do what we do and what is functional
Ah,
medicine and what is integrative and all that kind of stuff. So just like the basics, so that if you ever put out your podcasts, you can have this first, so that people will be like, who are these people talking to us?
good idea.
Who
That's a
are
good
they?
idea.
And why do we
Yeah,
care?
we just get on here and start talking.
I know. But well, plus we have all these podcasts saved, but if you ever want to launch them, they'll be like, why are we listening to them? But if they go back and hear our story, then they might be like, oh yeah,
Right.
they
True.
have a
Good point. Good
perspective.
point. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you start? What led you to, well, start to obsessed psychology, I guess, and all. So what was your path just to go to medical school?
Well, just like anyone else going to medical school, I went to UCLA undergrad, and then I actually originally wanted to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist of some sort. And, at UCLA, they have a really good PhD in psychology program. And I had a lot of friends who were in it, and they were like, oh, if you can get an MD and become a psychiatrist, they just get so much more dedicated research dollars. They just have such an easier path than kind of hanging out and trying to do your dissertation, which might take you a decade. They're like, medical school can be faster and you might get more out of it. And I was like,
Okay.
well, if I get into medical school, I'll go. But really, I just wanted to, my undergrad was in psychobiology. So I was like interested in the science of the brain and all that stuff. But so I was like, well, that's good. I mean, it's like that's good advice. I'll see how that works, because my degree kind of had a lot of pre-med already in it. So it was easy for me to take the MCAT and apply to medical school. Well, then I got into medical school and I was like, yeah, I guess I'll go. So but while I was in medical school, you have to do a rotation and everything. You have to be exposed to like all the core specialties. You have to do internal medicine. You've got to do family practice. You're going to be in the emergency room. You're going to do OBGYN. And psychiatry is one of the rotations that we get exposed to. But then, so when I went and did psychiatry, I was like, no. I was like,
Really? So
yeah. I mean,
what
it
was
just
it about
because,
psychiatry that, just curious?
yeah, we'll see, originally when I wanted a PhD in psychology or wanted to be like a therapist, they talk to people and help them with their problems. But psychiatrists just, get the most severe cases and they drug them. And I was like, that's not what I was thinking I wanted to do at all. And I was like, I wanted to do the other thing, but that is not what we're doing here. We're doing something else. So then as I went through the other specialties, I'm like, there's a good amount of psychiatry in gynecology. We call it gynecology sometimes because sometimes you think you went to gynecology clinic, but really you had, counseling all day. So I was like, that happens. So that's enough. That'll work. So, and plus, I like the surgery part of that. I mean, there's a lot of surgery. If you wanted to be just a gen surgeon, you could. And if you didn't want to ever do surgery and just wanted to deliver and, C-sections is your only surgery, you could do that. We have all sorts of different pathways in our specialty to, you can specialize in pain or be the person who does fertility. So I was like, oh, there's a lot of different avenues in this that I can do. So I ended up going into, OBGYN. And, while I was in, practicing, I started my own practice. And that was the year that they came out with the study that hormones were going to kill you. First of all, they taught us nothing about hormones. Like, hey, if they have hot flashes, give them some Prempro, and then you're done. And that's pretty much all we knew. And there was not a lot more to menopause than that. There just wasn't. There was not very many people specializing in it. There wasn't a lot of drugs to give people in menopause beyond here's your cholesterol. We didn't even connect all the other diseases to menopause. We're just like, oh, they have hot flashes and you can make them go away. We're done. All right. So that's all I knew about that. But that was the year that they took away Prempro. They sort of were like, oh, be careful now. Don't give it because maybe they'll get breast cancer. Then nobody wanted it. And so you have all these women wandering around who are flashing and their lives are very disrupted. Now they don't sleep. They don't want to have sex. They're gaining all this weight. And then they come and ask you, well, what should I do? And I'm like, well, you either take the Prempro or, option B is you just wait till they go away in a few years. And so, but I was like, that's not really good enough. I mean, when I get to that age, I will be unable to practice medicine if I'm feeling like they feel. How is, so that's when I started thinking like, oh, I need to start figuring something out to tell them better than I got nothing. Right.
Right.
So that was one thing. And there really wasn't a lot at the time. This is back, 20 years ago. So on top of that, I'm seeing pregnant women. And the, a lot of pregnant women were on antidepressants, so they were bipolar and were on bipolar medicines. Just somehow, like a third of my clinic was on some sort of medication that you cannot take pregnant. And they would, of course, either have to take the medication and I'd send them to a specialist who would manage them, or they would stay with me and just say, well, I'm just going to stop it. I'm like, but you kind of needed those 3 drugs because of your symptoms. So I started, reading like, oh, well, I read omega-3 is good for mood. Let's try that. I read this herb, or, so you have to find what's safe in pregnancy. Not very many things. What's studied in pregnant, like nothing. But I was like, I still, want to give them something to do. And as I was doing that, they were getting, like, when they had the baby and they could get back on their drug, I was like, okay, time to go back on your thing and so you can be happy again. And they were like, you know what? I was actually doing better on the herbs. And I was like, you were? That's weird. I just like, I wasn't expecting that, but okay. So I just kept my practice just got more and more, trying to do more natural things than a drug. And so then it circled back to the menopausal women. I was having such good luck with the pregnant women that when the menopausal women came in, I was like, well, let's just try to get healthy and let's, I started giving them suggestions. And in the meantime, I had gone and gotten like online, because I'm delivering babies. I can't like leave my practice for 6 months and get a degree. I got a master's in holistic nutrition and a master, and a naturopathic medical degree. And then I went and got, what did I do? American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. I started going to their conferences and got board certified. So I knew more and more things, like how to manage older women, because I was getting older myself. This is like 5-6 years into my practice. I'm like, in 3 or 4 years, I might start having some of these symptoms that these older women are having, and I need to not have them or be ready for
Yes.
this. I do not need to gain, oh my God, I gained 50 pounds in 3 months. I'm like, I never want to say that.
Right.
I don't want to pull off your 50 pounds that you gained. I want you to not gain it. Let's figure this out. So that's when I just really took a deep dive into it, because I was like, I'm telling, half my day was spent telling people that, I don't know. I'm I'm tired. I don't know. Like, why don't I like sex? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just like,
Yeah.
why, how can I lose weight? And I would tell them different things and they would come back and it wouldn't have worked. And I'm like, there's just more to it that we weren't taught and that nobody was
Mhm.
taught. There was not even anyone to go and send them to. So I had to become that person that you could send people to, and I basically am now. My practice is really more referral. Patients refer to me, but also physicians refer, because they can't, like, even if patients say, check my hormones. And we were having a whole discussion online today. Some psychiatrist came online and she asked in our medical group, she's like, well, if I want somebody to check their hormones, why are the gynecologists not checking people's hormones? And I'm like, A, they're going to check $1,000 worth of stuff. B, their reimbursement gets altered if they're a very expensive doctor. Like if I sit around and order $5,000 worth of labs on all my patients using their
Mhm.
insurance, if I'm employed, I'm not going to be their favorite doctor. If I take insurance, I'm not going to be their favorite doctor. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
backlash. Then the patient comes in and you're doing a 10 or 15-minute consultation because you're taking insurance. And now you don't have all the time to go through those hormones. I mean, when you draw labs, you need time to review
It
them
takes
and say
time.
what
Yeah.
we're going to do. If you have 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm like, I can see why you want to know the hormones, but you also need somebody who has studied them and then who has time to get the patient to understand it. I mean, like I've had, how many years of school did I have to figure out hormones? And now I'm going to try to explain that in 10 minutes to someone else.
I think too, there is a process of, we also, I think a lot of people don't realize that the back end, how much time we spend looking at all the test results, looking at everything and putting something together with functional medicine. So it's a little different than just writing a script for one product, right? Or one medication or something. So there's that as well. So, and sometimes it doesn't all just make sense. One thing's out of whack when everything else, so there's a whole like process to it as well. So yes, so I usually, how long do you typically take with your patients? About
An hour. Every single
Yep.
appointment is an hour. Even the follow-up. So people are like, oh, the follow-up is less time. I'm like, no, because now I have labs to review with you. I actually need
Mhm.
more time for the follow-up. And now, the first time they see you, they're kind of timid and may not want to ask a lot of questions. But the second time they come, now they've met you before and they're going to stay there longer and talk to you longer. It's like now it's more, you're getting more stuff. They tell me more personal things the second time, without me having to ask. And, so the second visit can actually take longer if I let it. And well, but, if there's not somebody behind them. So, but no, it's at least an hour. So I'm like, yes, I run a lot of labs. I have time to go through those labs. If I want to give them a hormone, I have time to tell them what the hormone, tell them all about it. I can properly consent it. You can't just give somebody estrogen and then not tell them all the things that are going to happen that are positive, but all the things that they should look out for that in 10 minutes, you cannot do that. It's very, very difficult to do that. And so, and I'm usually not just giving them one hormone, or I might give them an herb and an essential oil and a hormone, and then, and then another hormone and testosterone. And that's a lot of different, information that I have to help them, realize why they're on it. Nobody wants to take, $200 worth of stuff and not know exactly why they need it. So,
Stuff that potentially their insurance doesn't cover too, right? So
it never does. Now, if insurance covered it, the first doctor would have given it to them and they wouldn't have needed me. But by the time you walk into me, you have exhausted your insurance, options. And now you are, here we are. Nobody's going to voluntarily pay me cash and then have some more cash happening if they had another option.
Going to take care of it.
Correct. They've already got 5 drugs and they've been to 3 specialists. They've already used their insurance for what it's worth. And then they're like, all right, stop the madness. And here we are. So, like I said, I didn't really decide one day to do it. It just sort of evolved because so many things happened during my day that I was like, oops, there's not a drug for that. You're pregnant. Oops, you came off your bipolar medicine. There's not a book for that, or it's just, here's the natural bipolar thing. There is not that thing. I had to invent that thing. So you have to spend your whole day inventing things, and most people don't want to do that. It's not that easy, but but I, like I said, I
think you enjoy it too. I think that's another
I
part
did. I thought it was important. But nobody wants to. Nobody.
I think it's like the essential oils. You really just, I think you have a lot of enjoyment for a lot of that as well. So I think that makes a big difference.
But plus nobody wants to go to work all day and tell people, I don't know, well, it's like, well, nothing to do about that, because I really think that you can fix anything. It's just that we don't have the tools to fix everything. So, but I don't think there's anything that you cannot address. I just think that, if there's not an FDA approved drug for it, we just kind of back off of it and say, well, nothing. People have chronic headaches and we throw a drug at them and it doesn't work. And we're like, let's just keep trying different drugs. And we never go. I mean, I fixed more headaches once I started doing functional medicine than I ever did just as an OBGYN, because I was like, well, the other doctor has you on the drug. We're done. That's the end of my conversation with you. But now I'm like, let's change your diet. Let's take an herb. Let's do this. And I get rid of them almost all the time. I don't have, all the time. I was like, and I used to never get rid of them. And now I'm like, oh wait, all the time. And they would just go away by accident. It wasn't like we were even targeting that particular thing. People would just, I'd be like, hey, by the way, what happened to that headache? And they're like, yeah, I haven't had one in a long where'd it go? I don't know. And I'm like, see, what happened to your joint pain? You get up in the morning and you couldn't move. They're like, oh yeah, nope, not a problem. I'd be like, see, it would just be the weirdest stuff would happen that I wasn't, that wasn't even my assignment at the time. I was trying to go for hot flashes, and now they're like, oh wait, my hair grew back, my nails are great, and all sorts of things. And I was like, oh, let me keep playing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty satisfying too. I really feel like that because, I think because obviously on my end, I'm not licensed to prescribe drugs. And so it forces me to find natural alternatives for everything, right. And there's not the side effects. You don't see the side effects on the natural side. Now, I'm not saying that there are not side effects. If you do enough of anything, it could potentially be a problem. But I think that has always kind of forced me to stay really having to think differently and find solutions outside of the realm of medicine, because that's not been a place that I've even had access to. It's not a toolbox that I've ever even been able to look at, right? So that's and I also really appreciate medical doctors that have taken the time to learn. Because I can't tell you what's more frustrating to me than a patient coming in and telling me their MD has told them they can't take vitamins or they can't take certain vitamins, or, and there's not any true scientific or biochemical evidence why they're telling them that. It's just out of their place of not knowing. And since they don't know, they'd rather tell them not to take it than to really, so it's an interesting, so it's kind of cool that you were kind of forced to start looking in that direction.
I did. Because, if I go to the OBGYN scientific meeting, it's a week long or almost a week long, you're not going to find any talks about herbs and hormones or essential oils and anything about menopause and alternative stuff, like zero, never, nothing. I have to go to a completely different, I have to do 2 conferences a year, one to maintain my OBGYN certification and another one to stay afloat, learning all the stuff about anti-aging regenerative medicine. I have to go to their conference because that's where I'm going to get that. And, they don't cross paths. They're 2 different brain sets. And so most doctors aren't going to learn it because I had to keep learning time, for right? A number. It's time, but it's also like when I first just did the first degree, nutrition is awesome, but it didn't teach me a lot about herbs. I mean, it taught me some, but then I had to do the naturopathic medical degree. There was like, the more I learned, the more it clicked. You know what I mean? Sometimes when you know one thing, you think you know one thing, but if you don't know how it connects to everything else, you're still kind of just stabbing everybody with one thing. Like, hey, everybody just do a vegetarian diet. Okay, bye, I'm done. I've dieted you. That's not true.
and everybody's uniquely different. That's
right.
And just the opposite for me is like, that's all I've taken. Like, all of my classes have always been about nutrition, functional medicine, biochemistry, that's all my, well, I say all, I mean, I've taken a few chiro specific CEU classes, but 90+% of the classes I've taken for all my continuing education or all the seminars I've done have always been about nutrition. I mean, I don't think I've had, and I tell everybody that too. If they come in and they're taking certain medications, I'm like, completely out of my scope. I don't know enough about it. I could go look it up just like you can, but it's not anything that I've spent a lot of time learning about. And I mean, of course, we took Tox Farm and, in school, but it wasn't enough for me to know a lot about all these drugs. And so it's so out of my realm because that's all I focused on. So I try to explain that to people too, unless it's a doctor like you that's really been taken the time and really pushed themselves to go and learn something that's out of their typical, path. It's just they're not taught that, and so I think there's a lot to be said for docs that actually have taken that time and learned it.
Yeah, that's like the one, that's 1 or 2% of us in the whole scheme of things. Because it just to keep on top of OBGYN, especially nowadays, a lot of people are just doing OB or just doing GYN. But when you're trying to do both, there is so much new stuff out every single year that it literally takes every brain cell you have. So that's why people are like, why don't you take insurance? I'm like, because then I'd have to keep up with all of that stuff and then try to spend an hour with you doing this other stuff. And you just don't have the space to learn all of those things. So I'm like, I understand why they don't go and do A4M like I did, because it takes everything you've got to figure out. People come in, you don't want a patient to see a commercial and be like, can you give me the new birth control pill? And you're like, what? You better know what it is. Like, I don't know what it is. And they'll come and ask me and I'm like, I don't do that anymore. And I'm sure there is a new one, but I'm doing this. And so they will have to help you with the latest and the, somebody came today and they were like, oh, I'm not on a statin. I'm on some shot every 2 weeks for my cholesterol. And I was like, what? I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. So, so that's why, doctors who are practicing regular medicine, there's a lot of changes and advances and they really have to stay on top of it if they're going to, not get into trouble. So, and I can see why they wouldn't take the time to learn nutrition, because you can't halfway do that. It took me, it was a lot. Like, I know different things now 10 years after finishing that degree than I understood the day I finished the degree. Because once I learned oils, I'm like, oh, you could put those in the food. And once I learned herbs, I'm like, oh, you got to put this in the food. I mean, there's just more to it than one thing. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So
I guess my only challenge is, like I said, some of these doctors that are not educated on that side, that are telling patients things. And I think there does need to be a fine line where they say, where I'm really, I mean, of course, I'm not licensed to, I guess they're licensed to tell people not to take certain nutrients, but it's not based
Oh
on
yeah.
what they know though. And that's where I get a little frustrated, because I'm like, it's not really in the patient's best interest. But I also see it's like they're leaning on the side of caution. It's like, oh, what if there's a reaction that they're taking, they're taking that herbal blend and it could be like contraindicated with some kind of drug that they're taking.
Right.
But instead of looking it up, and of course that takes time,
Yeah.
they just say don't take it.
Yeah, because you only have 10 minutes to see the patient, or you can be looking stuff up all day long. So yeah, that's why I say I can see how if you're seeing a patient every 10 or 15 minutes, you don't have time to be double and triple checking. And then you can read like these 3 herbs aren't good for this drug. There's an interaction, and then you'll just tell people, don't take any of them because who can keep track of what does what. They get in less trouble to tell you not to do something than to tell you to do it, and then you go freestyling some stuff and then it doesn't work.
Right.
But like I said, I know that because I put it in my interaction checker, and I can, I can tell people, oh yeah, these 2, watch out, or we might have to increase your dose. So I'll tell people like what we might have to do, and they're like, okay, cool, or what to look out for, but they don't know that. I do it all day long, so it's easy for me to tell the next patient after I've already looked it up the first 3 patients. They don't have that opportunity to do it. So like I said, I remember when I practiced, and well, first of all, there weren't as many people, this was back at the early days of Dr. Oz when people weren't asking for as many natural options anyway. And the other thing is people want natural stuff, but when insurance doesn't cover it, they'll be like, I want something natural. Oh, here's a $50 pill. Oh, I don't want that. Does insurance cover it? No. Okay, never mind. So you get a lot of that. So, I had to split my practice because I was like, I want people to come to me who already know that they want to do that, and not, people who are like, well, I really want my insurance to cover something natural. And I'm like, I don't have a lot for that.
Good luck.
Right. They really don't. They're very, no, like not even a multi. You used to be able to, just walk in and do that. But now you even need a doctor to write you a prescription for the multi if you wanted to get covered or reimbursed.
Really?
Or like for
Well,
flexible
now I know they
spending.
can.
Yeah, flex spending. If I tell people like some of the supplements that I tell them to do, if I write a note about how they have to take it, oh, your cholesterol's high, here's your omega-3, they'll cover the omega-3 if I write that, if I connect it to a diagnosis.
Yeah, usually it's flex spending or health savings.
Right,
That'll
this
cover
is what I
those
mean.
things.
Yeah, insurance doesn't, but I'm saying like flex spending will do that.
Yeah.
Or you
And
can
then
even write it
sometimes-
off. Like, let's say you're on
Oh, true.
$100 worth of supplements a month, and so at the end of the year, that's $1,200. If I itemize what you should be doing, and you can like submit it to your accountant and see if they can
Deduct it.
right. So and that's that's a thing, because some people pay a lot of money for their health, their
Supplements.
gym, and their I could tell them, here's your gym and here's your diet plan, join this Weight Watchers or whatever, and then they can claim that if I tell
Well,
them to do it.
And I was going to say, and that's a really good point too. So if they're just buying like medicine, vitamins or supplements, like at the grocery store,
Mhm.
You can't, I don't know if you can write those off
You
unless
cannot.
they've actually been recommended by your doctor.
Correct.
Is that right?
I have
Yeah.
to actually write a note that they can
Mhm.
submit with their insurance.
Yeah,
I
so
have
that's
to
what
tell them to do it.
and my big thing too is
Now, can you
because
do that too, or is it just me? I don't know if an MD has to do it or any
Oh
practitioner
yeah,
of any
no,
sort.
any practitioner that practices that. If I say any practitioner, I mean it has to be somebody licensed, but
Right.
Not the health coaches and stuff like that.
Right.
That's
Yeah, I wasn't sure, what the license was. Like I said, sometimes I don't know things because I'm like, well, I know I can do it, but I don't know after that. Like, can a
Yeah.
podiatrist do it? Can I was like, well, who does
I'm
this?
sure, well,
Yeah, I don't know.
that what I've seen, well, interesting, you mentioned psychologists. I have a few psychologists that I know, and what they're doing is they're doing a lot of the nutrition with people as well, the functional medicine,
Yeah.
because obviously they're not licensed to prescribe the medications. So they're kind of pushed to do things naturally as well. And so that's been really neat to see some of those kind of, doctors doing more nutrition and functional medicine with people. So yeah, but no, if long as they could purchase it, as long as it's something I've been recommended,
Right.
or if they're buying it through a professional dispensary, or
Right, the dispensary.
usually
Yeah.
that line. I think even if they buy it at the grocery store, it's a little bit more challenging to write those things off, from what I understand.
It's challenging, but like if you have to really do a good itemized note, like if I say
Yeah.
go to Walmart and get a wanted, once daily multiple vitamin, they can probably use that as proof that they were told. But it's
Right.
easier if they went into like a dispensary to get it, or even
Yeah.
the Young
And that's
Living
awesome.
stuff. Sometimes the essential oils, like, because a lot of times when I write my notes, I'll actually put up a study like, oh, lavender essential oil was studied for this, this, and that, and you have this, this, and that. So I want you to take lavender oil, and they could be,
Potentially,
right,
right off a few of them. Yeah, that's a good point.
correct,
That's a good
because
point.
yeah.
So,
And my
and
book
then,
helped me with that, because in my book, every single thing that I put in each chapter was studied. I
right.
didn't write it in the chapter if it wasn't. So then it's easy for me to look and say, oh, okay, I can tell you these 5 things because I know there's a study somewhere. Let me
Right.
go find it. Yeah. Yeah. So then when you became a chiropractor, you were
So,
not planning
yeah,
to go into nutrition, and your school did not teach you about nutrition. You did that later.
no, 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 no. So my undergrad, I started out freshman year with biochemistry. My intention was to go to medical school, and I mean, loved it. So second semester, I considered staying in biochemistry, and I kind of thought, I really, you start doing, especially as a 17-year-old kid, like trying to figure things out. Is that really what I want to do? And I started really looking at all the different like avenues of being an MD, and I couldn't pick one that was really something that I'm like, I really want to do that. Never really had any interest in delivering babies or cutting people open or and the one thing was I really didn't want to be a scriptwriter. And it seemed like when I started looking at a lot of the avenues, that was the biggest thing. So it's either surgery or prescriptions. And that just it didn't resonate with me. So I thought, you know what? I just changed my major to nutrition. And so I studied nutrition back then. And what I was always fascinated with, so you mentioned psychology, which I think is really cool. I was always fascinated with what is it about some people that, they can choose to eat well and take care of themselves and they tend to stay thin. But then there's other group that chooses to just eat like crap and not take care of themselves. And I think there was a psychology. And of course, I was pretty young back then. I didn't, and I think too, my mom and my aunt were, they're both they're sisters, but they were both adopted. And one of them was very, very overweight, my aunt, and my mom, she was always pretty normal, normal size, normal weight. And so it was always interesting. I'm like, what is it about? Like, what is the psychology behind it? What is it that draws one to eat? So,
So they
and
were
of
raised
course,
in the same household. They had the two same genetic parents,
mhm.
and they were raised in the same household, but a different household because they were adopted
Well,
into.
yeah, different genetics, obviously, but yeah, raised the same way with the same, and
Okay.
my grandparents were overweight, so it was always interesting to me. And so then I thought, well, and then I started doing. I just thought that was always fascinating, and it's
Hmm.
not something I really was delving into at that point. But so anyway, study nutrition, and then I guess, of course, I was working my way through college too. So I was working full time, and it was a lot. I'll admit that it was a lot. And so I took a few food science classes and found like, oh, if I do basically food science as my major versus nutrition, it's shift things a little bit. I can graduate an entire year earlier. So I did that and ended up working with a company in the food industry. It was my senior year. I was doing an internship, and it was really interesting. But I started like looking, and what was really fascinating is that I ended up going to IFT show, which was Institute of Food Technologists. And at the time, I was working for a company that we manufactured a leavening agent. So it was very just you sell to bakeries basically. And I was introduced to a company that manufactured botanical extracts. And the guy, and I wasn't real content with my job. I'll admit that. And so I was kind of using that as an opportunity to kind of also, look around at other possibilities. And so this one company manufactured botanical extracts, and the guy that was their sales rep, he was like, well, and we just kind of started chatting. He's like, he's like, you would be really great for this company. He said, it's kind of it's a smaller company. He goes, but I'm about to take another job in another company. He goes, I'll introduce you to my boss. And so got introduced to his boss, did some interviews. I was hired right away, which was really cool. And that was when I was introduced to the realm of, not just nutrition, but the the botanicals. And so we manufactured botanical extracts, and I got to work with, this was like the beginning. This was back in 97, 98. And so it was back when, we were still, ginseng was kind of just coming around, but the echinacea was just kind of starting to be a buzzword about with immune health. And we worked with everything from, I got to work with obviously the nutritional supplement companies, the GNCs, the Weeders, the Rexall, Sundowns, all those guys. You name it, I've probably been in their facilities. And then we were also called, of course, the food companies, which was a little bit less so, because initially botanical extracts were more used in the food and flavor industry, which is what their primary business was. So we sold these extracts like a sweet birch, or fenugreek extract as a flavoring ingredient to companies that manufactured different flavoring, like McCormick or Mother Murphy. They did, was always thought this was kind of cool. They did the sugar, the flavoring for the sugar coating of Krispy Kreme donuts. And people don't think about, people don't think about like, oh, there's actually a flavoring that goes into that sugar that goes onto those donuts. There's a whole process to it.
And it's healthy. Let me go get my fenugreek donut on. I'm kidding.
So, and Coca-Cola, people don't realize like how many flavor ingredients go into make the final flavor for a Coca-Cola. I mean, there's a lot. It's not just cola nut extract. There's a lot of extracts that go into that, and so I was calling on a lot of the flavor and food companies. And then of course we started really delving into the nutrition side and calling on a lot of the nutrition companies. And then cosmetics, that was a lot of fun too. So companies like Mary Kay, Estee Lauder, some of the bigger guys that were in the United States, that they were putting green tea in one of Estee Lauder's big products, Tamyra.
That's big for face stuff, like green tea, CoQ10, vitamin C. Yeah, it's great.
Yep. So they were adding some of the green tea and some of the extracts and some of the vitamins, now I didn't do the vitamin side at that point, but so it was really cool. And I guess there was a point that I kept, here I am, I'm traveling. It's a great job. It's a cool thing. I got recruited to the competitor, which was really cool too, because it was a lot bigger company. But the whole time, with all this going on, I'm still like checking in. I'm like, what, because there's this little girl thing, part of me that always wanted to, I don't know what it was, where I got it, but I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. It was just this little girl dream, I guess. And at the same time, what I was really missing was working one-on-one with people, like really making a difference for people. I was, we were making all these finished products, and it was really cool to see, work on, with the R&D guys and create this product and like have it come to fruition and see it on a store shelf or on a retail store shelf or whatever. But it was also, there was that lack of that personal, I guess, interaction with people and making a difference. So then I started really just looking at all the different ways I could potentially do nutrition with people. It's like, now I've got all these herbal knowledge and I've got the nutrition knowledge, and I'm like, how do I do this? How do I really bring it together? And so from undergrad, I had girlfriends, mostly girls, ironically, that had gone the registered dietitian route. And, I was looking at what they were doing, and I wanted nothing to do with that. They're working in hospitals or nursing homes and, calculating the bolus for tube-fed patients. I'm like, ugh. It was just, I'm glad people are doing that. Not something I was drawn to.
I know, it was like, it wasn't exciting, like, ooh, excitement. No, it was math. It sounded like math.
Wasn't my thing at all.
Yeah.
And, doing meal planning for people was like, I just didn't see that at all. But what I found was that with chiropractic, I could basically treat nutrition and diagnose and treat with nutrition as a doctor, where dietitians are not allowed to do that. Nutritionists are not allowed to do that. So I could truly be a doctor and use nutrition, as part of my treatment plans. Right. And so that's where I kind of was drawn to that. I kept looking. You mentioned a naturopathic doctor. I started the program for the ND program. Naturopathic doctor program.
Yeah.
I think I got about 6 months in, and I was just like, this just isn't what I want to do. And naturopathic doctors are not recognized in Texas.
Correct. That is your big problem with it. You would have liked being a naturopathic doctor, but not in this state. If you were in Oregon or all up and down the West Coast it's big for that. But
Yes.
yeah, there's 17
That was a
states.
challenge.
Yeah.
And so I started that, and it was a great amount of knowledge that I
Yeah.
got, but I never finished the program because, again, I was like, I kind of feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I can't really practice in Texas.
Right.
And so, and then I, of course I looked at different modalities, but I even talked to about going to do a master's degree in nutrition, master's in psychology. I mean, I was like, really, but it was always focused on those things. And one morning I woke up and my neck was in so much pain that I could not turn my head. I mean, it was bad. And I couldn't figure out, I was like, how did I go to sleep one way and wake up this much pain? Well, of course, now I know it was basically like a facet syndrome. And it was a Sunday, and I had a roommate that had been, her mother was from China. And so they had introduced me to acupuncture. And so the only person I could think of to call on this Sunday that was open, that would actually see me, was this acupuncturist that I had met. And I was not about to go to an emergency room. I'm like, what are they going to do? Give me a drug? I don't want that. And so I went, and I sat there, and it was just funny. It was so funny, Tamara. I'll never forget this, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, literally was holding my neck on the way there because it was hurting so bad. It's like every bit of movement was just making me want to cry. And he went around and he did a quick adjustment on me, which in Chinese medicine they call Tui Na. It's not really chiropractic. It's a little, I put some needles in me and I was better. And the next, I was not 100% by any stretch. I was probably 20-30% better. The next morning I got up to go see my chiropractor. He adjusted me. And by Tuesday, I was almost 100% back to normal. And to me, to go from that extreme level of like that much pain to that none was pretty amazing. And so it kind of pushed me to like call the chiropractic school. And at the time, they were starting that Friday, basically was when the next semester was like the end of, something for the next semester. I still needed, I think, a physics class that I didn't take undergrad. And so I went ahead and applied, and I was very fortunate. I mean, I already had a lot of the prereqs from undergrad. I already had the grades and experience. And so I was able to get in pretty easily and started my class. So yeah, that's my story. And I've just been, ever since I've become a chiropractor, like I said, 90% of my classes, continuing education, have been nutrition. Now, that's not all I'm not all chiropractors, obviously, but that's just been my thing. I've always been fascinated with it. And along the way, I studied hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming. So I kind of pulled that into the whole system. And
yeah, I never don't tell people, but I studied that too. I mean, but not like you did. You'd probably do it to a real school. I mean, I went online and I was like, what is hypnosis and what is that? I mean, I was always interested in it, but didn't really know enough to. When other people go get hypnotized, I was like, what's going on with that? So I did a class, but then I realized that a lot of times when you are just talking to people, you are reprogramming them. I can't say I'm hypnotizing anybody, but definitely what you tell them has a lot to do with their treatment. If you're like, oh, that's a really bad problem you've got there, I don't think it'll get any better. It won't get any better. If they believe it and you believe it, there is no path to making it better. But if I'm like, well, you know what, there's a certain set of steps you could do to make progress, and let's try it. And they're like, oh, really? You think there's hope? Well, sure. I mean, there's this, people get better all the time, and we're going to do the right things. And then that's a whole two different conversations, with people. So I knew that before I did the hypnosis class. I was like, there's something I do, I have really good success with, my natural medicine journey here. And people are always like, you don't use a drug and you still have good results. And I'm like, for some reason I have better results. I can't say why. And I shouldn't, because a drug actually cures a disease. And what I do is not always a drug. And so it shouldn't cure anything, but somehow people get better faster. Could be because they do it. It could be because I said, no, here's the path, and I've laid it out clearly for you. Whereas when you give them a drug, it's not really a clear path. It's like, here's a drug, come back, let me know. You know what I mean? It's like a whole different, thought, and a different amount of, I don't know what you interest in it. You people don't even, they're like, oh, I'm in a drug, now I'm sad, and I got a disease, and it's a whole different situation than when you're like, well, you have a situation, let's just make it better, and let's do these things to make it better. And they're just so much more compliant. And like I said, there's probably a role of,
well, it's just a little level of influence, and they
influence.
Yeah, they have a whole, I think there was a whole book written on, the white coat syndrome, and,
Yep.
People's, blood pressure will increase just being in the presence of a white coat.
Oh yeah.
And regardless of what we think of the person, I say that but when a patient's sitting in front of their doctor, subconsciously, they've been programmed their whole life to believe that that person knows more than they do, regardless of what the subject is, right?
Right.
But that's just what they've been programmed. And so when they speak, there's a lot more authority to it. And so, yeah, it does. It makes such a difference with people. And that's why I'm so careful when I'm talking to patients, but also, when I hear these doctors with the way some of them talk to patients, I'm like, I just want to cringe, because I know how much it's affecting their subconscious. So like you said, it's like, oh, we'll try this. Well, I don't know if it's going to work or not.
Yeah. Well, especially after they've come to me for stuff and they're like, oh, I've been to 6 people and they're all like, oh, this is just how it's going to be. And then I'm like, well, I was like, in a way, let me validate what they said to you, because there is no drug that specifically is addressing your problem. And so if that's all we're looking at, that is actually correct. However, you and I aren't going to be just looking at a drug. There's a lot of things that could be at play here, and let's do that. And then that's just a whole different conversation than, well, there's not a drug. Oh, well, let's just, because I understand being in that position. If I worked for a hospital group, or if I had a true boss, I'd be handcuffed into what I could do. They'd be like, what are you giving patients? Don't do that. That's not in the book. That's not on our protocol. You can't do it. And so, I don't have that restraint, but a lot of physicians do. And, they're contracted with insurance. They got to do what's on their list. And so if you're handcuffed by that type of system, then you go in and say, I want this to get better, they're like, well, this is all we got. This is what's on the list. Here's where we are. So like, you go to McDonald's and say, I want gumbo. Well, that's not on our list and you can't have it. It's not that gumbo is unattainable. It's just that you are here and this is not what we do.
Yeah, exactly. So
you just can't have it.
So yeah, but that's my story, and it's been a good journey. It's interesting how life turns and takes us different places, and we learn things based on different experiences. And but I've pretty much been consistently always kind of headed the same direction.
Yeah.
With in general, but I definitely have obviously learned a ton along the way, and there's been a lot of things that and I've always found the most natural way to treat somebody. And my goal is always to, not that I'm telling patients to stop taking their medications, but it's like to set them up for success, to be able to get off their medications and, and feel good without them. Right. So to me, I think there's always a natural answer for just about everything.
Yeah. Now, when did we meet? When did we meet? I don't remember.
What's that?
When did we meet? Did we meet at some sort of transformation enzyme thing?
I was trying to think. I think so. What it was? I want to say we started talking. I want to say it was it a transformation thing? Because I remember, oh man, what was it? I remember it was like in some kind of like little country, not a country club, but some kind of little meeting.
Like a drug rep dinner? No, it could have been one of their little dinners. Maybe they used to have dinners.
Because I remember that Arland Hill was there and he had a table. I want to say multiple people.
Oh, it could have been a SpectraCell thing then. Was it could have been a SpectraCell thing? Yeah, but it was at one of those meetings like where they were giving us more information, and we met. And then and that was when I started to work with transformation enzymes and stuff. So we both had.
It must have been like a testing company.
Yep, probably so.
Type of meeting or something, because I remember there was more than one vendor there of different supplements. It wasn't just transformation.
Right.
Very true. Very true. So yeah, it's interesting, our journeys,
Yep. Especially with
when you were young, did you think did that ever cross your mind, delivering babies?
No. Actually, the first time I ever saw a video of a delivery, I was just like, oh my God, I could not be in the room with that. I mean, this is when you're in medical school and you have to watch it. And I was like, okay, for sure that is not the room I'm going to end up in. Like, I'll go cut your leg off. I'll dig a hole in your brain, but I do not want to see, that's a whole lot of mess and blood right there. It's like, a lot of people say, oh, I didn't want to go to medical school because I didn't want to look at blood. I'm like, none of us like blood. It's not like we came like, where's the blood at? Give us some more, nobody wants to see blood. We've just, resigned ourselves to, when you're a psychiatrist, you really don't see blood.
See blood, right?
And,
Exactly.
brain surgeons, they don't actually see a lot of blood either. There's certain
Yeah,
specialties where you don't see it. And then OBGYN, that's the most blood ever.
that's
So I
interesting.
definitely was not signing up for that. And then just somehow you get in the room and forget there's blood because all these other things are happening. So
Yeah, well, and I think when I was a kid too, I mean, nutrition was like, I don't even think we use that word. We grew up in a very Southern type home cooking, I guess we ate a lot of vegetables, because my grandfather had that big garden in his backyard, and we tended to eat a lot of vegetables, but we ate a lot of fried foods, a lot of meat and potatoes. And so we weren't really actively focused on nutrition. So that was not really in my scope. And then chiropractic, I don't even know if I'd even heard of chiropractic when I was a kid. It was not something. So, it's interesting. And then hypnosis, I think I thought of hypnosis. I grew up Southern Baptist, and I think I thought of it as like the devil's work.
right.
I didn't know anything about it. And of course, anything that's of the unknown has got to be of the devil, right? When I was growing up in my overbearing church, but
right. No, when I was growing up, we had a lot of nutrition because my mother was an athlete, my father was an athlete, and then we're from California where everybody's kind of hippie-ish, you know what I mean? So she'd be like, oh no, you can't have cough syrup. I'm gonna go make you golden seal tea. And I'm like, it tastes like pee. She goes, you don't know what pee tastes like. I'm like, but that's what pee would taste like if I were drinking it. I'm not drinking that. So I mean, I had this battle with my mother about herbs because she was very like, no, you're not going to use any medicines. Here's herbs. And, she was all, we had Back to Eden or whatever herbal Bible book was in our house. And so I would be like reading through it all the time. And she'd make garlic liniment. I mean, she'd make all kinds, everything she made smelled awful. And I was just like, this herb thing that you've got is terrible because it all smells bad. And I am not down for you. So then I went to, medical school, and I was like, ooh, I have drugs. Would you like some estrogen? And she's like, no, I have my tea. I have my Dong Quai, and I have my black cohosh, and then I take them and drink them. And I'm like, you're weird. You have all these free hormones I could give you, and you're going to go play with some stupid tea. But,
herbs, right?
Yep, that's what she did. And then eventually, when they took all the Primpro and estrogen and told everybody it was bad and you don't want it, I was like, Mom, what were those things you were drinking again? I had to go back and ask my mother what to do. So I was like, yeah, it came. So it wasn't like herbs were something I did not know about. They just were something I felt like, oh, I have medicine. It's going to be so much better and so much stronger. Why am I going to dabble with little weak herbs? And then I figured out, A, people will take those little weak herbs, and B, if you get them in oil form, they are not weak at all.
Right.
So,
well, I think too, what I think is amazing is I've always believed that medicine has, I know there's some patients that cannot get off certain medications. However, if the least amount possible, and if there's a natural way to have them take care of themselves, I just think it's such a better choice in the long run. But yeah, it's interesting though. It is interesting though. As I look here at my 500 books about everything under the sun with nutrition. I started acupuncture too when I started chiropractic, because I thought that would be a good mix. And I kind of decided along that journey that I didn't want to complete that because I felt like there were other people that were more passionate about acupuncture, and it's such a unique art. And I say art because it really, I don't know, there's so much to it with the Chinese medicine and Chinese understanding TCM, and these doctors that were true TCM docs, man. It was just really neat to kind of see how they really worked, because they would practice their chi, they would practice, increasing their chi. There was a whole process to acupuncture. It was much more than just putting needles in people. So I did study a little of that, got a little of that in, but not enough to.
There's a certificate online where I could go. So I've never like done any hands-on acupuncture, but I did do like reading about, because when after I got into the Young Living oils, they had all these Vitaflex points, and they're like, put them here and then put your other one there and then put one over here. And I was like, I need to learn acupuncture just to figure out why they're telling people to do this.
Yeah. So that's a whole different realm.
It is.
I did get to study, all the foundations, like the diagnosis. I did stop around the treatment side just because it was that's when I kind of decided it was too, well, first of all, it was kind of a lot. I was going from all day to one school to all night to the other. It was just overwhelming. But with that being said, TCM diagnosis is completely different than medical, than our, allopathic side.
Oh yeah.
Completely different. So.
Oh yeah, they'll look at your tongue and check your pulse and tell you more things than I could ever get with blood work.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And so, yeah, that's something. And I kind of, too, I have a lot of appreciation for it, because I see all these doctors, MDs, chiros, whatever. They have to take like a little weekend course practically to be certified as acupuncturists. And I think, I don't know if they're really learning.
Right, that is true. I need to go do that. I'm about to say, speaking of that, I should go do it.
Yeah, the level of acupuncture that it really, to me, it really takes to get healing. And what I found too, which is interesting, is that you go to a true TCM doctor and you can, it's like when they put those needles in, you feel the chi flowing from one side of the body to the other. When you go to somebody that's just put needles in, it's
dry needling, which is something that I could do. But it's dry needling or prolotherapy. I mean, all those are different. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm doing acupuncture like I actually know how to go up your whole meridian. I had to learn what the meridian was, and I was like, yeah, I'm still not there. But I can, if you have one little spot in one little area, or technically when I do vaginal rejuvenation, that's a lot of kind of prolotherapy. And no acupuncturist would ever touch you down there. And if they did,
that's true.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of points in those areas, but yeah, they're not points that are typically used.
No, but yeah, but to say there are points, and I know where I figured out where they are, but no, most acupuncturists wouldn't deal with it. So like I said, I have my very tiny, specific 3 things that I know that I can target reliably, but I'm not going to go all over your body and figure out how to get you to stop smoking, drinking, or doing anything else with that acupuncture, because that's what they do. I have my thing that I do, but I still think it's interesting and it's worthwhile, because a lot of patients come to me and have been to a chiropractor and an acupuncture, and I have to know enough to say like, oh, did they do muscle testing? Did they do this? Did they tell you that? Did they look at this? And I know how to like gather information about what happened and try to flow with the plan.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm glad to see more. You mentioned integrative. I'm glad to see like that happening more and more. I don't think we're there yet. I think in other countries they really have a much better system of truly integrating all the different modalities of healthcare, but we are kind of a long way from that. But I'm seeing it is kind of neat to see it more and more though.
I know. So yeah, when people ask you like, do they ask you what the difference between functional medicine, or do you tell them that you practice functional medicine, or they just know you're a chiropractor who does nutrition, so they don't really ask you about that?
I use that term. I do explain to people the nutrition medicine back in order, using nutrition to treat, using therapeutic doses of nutrients and, lifestyle and diet changes basically to treat. Obviously, there's different testing that we do, and most of it, of course, is not covered by insurance, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely, that's typically what I tell people. So
yeah, and I never really use functional, because I mean, I'm board certified in anti-aging and regenerative medicine. And they're like, you can't anti-age. And I'm like, well, you can age real fast. So you can definitely change that. So anti-aging is sort of like, well, when you go through menopause, you're aging faster than when you were younger, and you don't want to. So anti-aging medicine is the unraveling of that. It's like, I don't want you to age in dog years. I want you to age in real time or slower than that. And there's a lot of ways you can manipulate that. And integrative, so a lot of people think that, oh, because I use essential oils or because I use herbs or vitamins, that I'm completely natural and that no one's ever going to get a drug. And I'm like, no, integrative is when, yeah, I know how to write you a regular prescription, and I can, but I also have this giant basket of all this other stuff I can do, and I pick and choose what I'm going to do. Some doctors can just do the natural stuff, and some doctors can just do the prescription stuff, and I have way more stuff. I just have so many things. I'll never run out of ideas. I was like, that's why I never say a disease, whatever you have can't be improved, because I'm like, I will never run out of things to do to you. Never in a million years. Or they'll come and they'll be sad. They're like, oh, there's so many things wrong with me. And I'll be like, you're my new toy. It's like,
and I think that's always the most interesting too, because like you said, by the time they get to you, they've kind of exhausted other routes. And I think the same is true for chiropractic, functional medicine, nutrition. By the time they get to me, they've exhausted all the other routes and nothing is working. And they're kind of like, well, last resort, I'll try this. Right. And so that's always been kind of an interesting thing to me too. I'm not the doctor that they call first typically, unless I've trained them well, because they've had such great success in the past. So,
Right.
you know,
Exactly. So yeah, no, integrative is when I do everything. And actually, yeah. And also, sometimes it's just being able to work with other, I mean, I've had patients who've gone to get sound therapy and, like I said, they've gone to other specialists, and I can say, tell me what everybody else told you and what you're on, and let's try to like put this together, because very few people will look at everything that's going on. Your pulmonologist is going to look at your lung, and your heart doctor is going to look at your heart, and your neurologist is going to look at your brain, and none of them are cross-referencing what's happening. I'm like, let me see if all your things are three random things, or if they actually have a common cause. And if I go after the common thing, you don't need five different people looking at you.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think that is a differentiation too between the realm of nutrition, functional medicine, is we're not looking down like a tunnel at one organ in the body. We really do look from a holistic perspective, because you've got to look at the entire person. And I think that is something that is a little bit unique and different about, functional medicine, integrative medicine, whatever, whatever we want to call it. But compared to going to a specialist that tends to be looking down a tunnel. And because it's always interesting. I see that with patients all the time, and they get so focused on the symptom, and the symptoms correlate to this organ, and that's all they're looking at. So it is.
Yeah, or the big thing that'll happen with me is that people will say, oh, you looked at my labs, I'm going to send you my labs, and just look at the labs and then tell me what you think. And I'm like, these labs are nothing without me telling me something. I mean, like the labs are just there for us to make the picture that you painted for me make sense. It's like looking at a Rorschach blot, and it means nothing. Everybody's going to look at it differently. So I might look at a lab that's very abnormal and say, oh, well, considering the fact that you told me you had a headache and you were sick that day, this is actually right in line with that. But if I just looked at it without knowing all that, I'd be like, oh, you're dying, and you don't want that.
It's like, you just don't. That point is, how many patients have you had that have all these symptoms and their blood work comes in very normal? I say their blood work, but their standard CBC,
right,
comprehensive blood, just their basic blood work, it comes in completely normal. Yep. And their doctors have told them that there's nothing wrong with them. However, they're feeling all these symptoms, right? And that's where I think they get frustrated too with the medical model. Is the doctors are really, a lot of them are only looking at the lab work. So
yeah. Exactly. So yeah, that's why I'm like, no, it's going to be both. They're like, I'm going to send you my lab and you'll just tell me what you think. And I'm like, I will think nothing until you come see me. Even if I do food allergy testing or food intolerance testing, I mean, I'll be like, sometimes I have to pick and choose how we're going to approach it. Cause I'm like, if I find a test and you can't eat 10 things, it's hard to give up 10 things at once. I might say, these are the ones that I want you to do first because they correlate with your other conditions. And let's ignore these other ones and only pull them in when we need to, So I mean, how I interpret it and how other people are going to interpret it, or even the patient interpreting themselves, are different. Like, even if you have a lot of abnormal labs, I might be like, let's just pay attention to this one, because I think if we knock this one down, the rest of them will fall in line. Don't look at it like you have 20 different weird things. It's like, I think there's one thing that's really important and everything else is flowing from that. So I'm like, yeah, we have to like have a conversation. That's why it takes an hour, because we're going to have a conversation about what we're going to do.
That, and I think too, you're looking more for the true underlying cause, where which is what I do. It's like the focus is like, what is really causing all this? The symptom is you're losing your hair. Your symptom is you've got this, you've got depression or anxiety, right? But what is the underlying cause of all that? And I think that's where a lot of doctors are not really trained to look for the cause. They're just trained to treat the symptom. And I think that's where, when you really start delving into a lot of the functional medicine, nutrition, your additional certifications and that kind of thing, you're looking deeper. That's my perspective anyways. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's true. I agree.
It's like, oh, you've got a headache, here, take a Tylenol. It's like,
yeah,
Tylenol, you're not deficient in Tylenol. That's not the reason you're having a headache. So let's take that a step further. It's like, why are you having headaches? Let's see, are you lacking nutrients? Are you toxic? Are you inflamed?
Like, well, and if somebody had a headache, I would be like, there could be 10 potential reasons, and we're just going to go one by one. Vitamins are easy for me to say, okay, let's just put all the vitamins we think could be added back. And then if that works, then we're done. If that doesn't work, we're moving on to food allergies, or, then we're going to pull some foods out. Okay, you still have a headache. Let's move on to the next thing. I was like, I'm not, I will not, and so far I haven't even tried an herb or an oil yet. You know what I mean? Like the first things are you're doing something or lacking something, and that's always the case, but it might not be sufficient to fix the problem.
Right.
And then we're going to keep going until and like I said, I always get there, but it's a process. And if somebody walks in and says, in 10 minutes, I want you to hand me a pill and have this all resolved, I'm like, that's why you're in the situation, because
you came to the wrong place.
Yeah. I mean, I've had people who want to lose weight, and I've got 40 pounds off of them, but it took a year and a half, because I'm like, I actually have to fix your metabolism. And that's a hard thing to fix, because I got to fix the other 10 problems that preceded that. And then the metabolism will be like, okay, all these other things aren't here. And, so I was like, it's a journey. If you've had headaches for 10 years, I might not fix them in 10 days.
Well, the other thing I was thinking is, a lot of times, talk about programming, patients are programmed, by the media, by the way they're treated, like from children, going into doctors. It's like, okay, I've got a sore throat. They go to their doctor gives them this prescription, they take it, and they get better, right? Whether that's the only thing, but that's the typical programming that people have of how it's supposed to be. And so I think there's a whole level of education that we have to do with patients too, because we've got to unlearn their habits around thinking that's what getting better is about. So, I think that's a whole different level of working with patients too, because I still have people that come in, well, I've got this thing going on. What vitamins do you have that'll fix that? Like, okay, it's like this one vitamin is going to fix that. It's like, yeah, but that's really just stemming from, that's the way they were raised from the time they were little, going to doctors and getting a prescription and getting their pill to fix their problem, right? So
right, that your cough there's a cough drop, and then your headache, there's an aspirin, and then there's this, but sometimes I'm like, no, this is a 10-year-long problem. That's if one thing would have worked, you've tried 20 things, and so if one thing at a time would work, we'd be there. But it's going to be 3 or 4 things together that are going to work, and we have to pick all those little pieces out and figure it out. So it's more of a puzzle thing than the other.
Exactly.
But so that's functional is trying to return so your function.
It's a re-education, I guess, is probably a better way to put it. Right. Is have us, I guess that is one of the challenges, because I do have people that come in and they think that, oh, it's like one treatment, one thing, one vitamin, one pill, one herb, one supplement's gonna be the answer. And
right. Yeah, but it depends on the severity of the problem. I've had some younger people only have to see me once or twice because they did have something that was, they haven't had the problem for as long, and I just had to figure something out. But that's younger people, and that's somebody within a shorter problem that I can say, oh, okay, let's try a couple of things. But if I have somebody who's like 50 or 60 who's been like, oh yeah, I've been having a problem with my thyroid for 20 years and my headache for 20 years and my weight's been off for 10 years, and now here's my one new thing of menopause, I'm like, okay, you want all these other things to go away, and you have to look at them and figure some stuff out. I'm like, this is not a one visit thing. This is most of my patients are ongoing, see me twice a year forever. Because I'm prescribing something and you can't get a prescription without seeing me. but even if I put them on a lot of natural stuff, we still have to sometimes alter it. Because here came a pandemic, right? So even if I had people rock stable before the pandemic, but now there's all this, you're sitting at home and there's all this stress, and now I've got to change a lot of what's going on. I'm like, oh, now we weren't focused on your immune system because it was fine, but now we might have to make sure there's just different
because
things.
like you said, stress and lack of activity and not getting out in the sunshine and lack of interaction, all those things, they increase the stress in our body, which in turn increases the need for certain nutrients, right? And so that's something that I think a lot of people didn't really, I don't think anybody takes that into account. They kind of think, well, I'm sitting, and they're probably eating more junk too. That was the big
Uber Eats, because when you cook, it's one thing, but when you're ordering all this food and that's a different calorie.
I think a lot of people were stress eating quite a bit too.
That too.
Just out of the sheer, like, feeling of helplessness or hopelessness in a weird way, based on the news anyways.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's true. You have to reevaluate all those things. In different times, different things happen, and
Yeah. Or even
life
people, I'll
changes.
put them on a plan. Like how often does this happen to you? You put people on a plan, you're like, here's what we're going to do. And then they'll call you and say, oh, it's not working anymore. And then when you bring them back in, you're like, oh, so are you still taking this supplement that I told you to take? Oh, I ran out. Are you still taking this one? Oh, no, I didn't do that. Are you still not eating gluten? Oh, I went on vacation. Then I started eating it again. I'm like, okay, the plan works. You just aren't doing it.
You're not being consistent with
I know
the
they're
plan.
calling me like I'm gonna fix a thing that they're not even doing. I'm like, I can't fix it
Right.
because you're not even doing it. It's like, how do you fix my Honda? But you bought a Ford.
Yeah.
I can't fix your Honda if you switch cars. Yeah.
Well, and that's a big one, I think, with people with supplements. They think that they're all kind of made alike. So you put them on one product and then they go and find it cheaper somewhere else, and they start buying and using that. And it's not the same either quality or the same forms of certain nutrients, or the same, potentially they're not absorbing it as well because it's not the same quality.
Yep.
And so,
or it's counterfeit. It's just straight up counterfeit.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I know I have a patient, and we do nutrition, pretty regularly for the past quite a few years, actually. And this most recent time we did a blood work and his B's were low. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? Because I'm thinking he's still taking the same B that I've been telling him to take. And oh no, his wife had found another B and she had him on that. And so my lesson was, I appreciate you finding other products and researching them. I said, but the challenge is, if they don't work, there's a reason I give you the certain ones that I give you. It's not because I'm, anyways, it was just kind of funny.
I know.
But it was so night and day, his blood work from the last time we did it to this time, and his B's were all low. And that was the biggest consistent thing that had happened was they had changed products, and it was a different,